Have you ever stopped to think about what your air conditioner is actually doing? I mean, beyond just blasting cold air. It turns out it's way more sophisticated than that. It's kind of like a master chef, carefully crafting the perfect recipe for the air you breathe to make you comfortable. And how it does it is honestly pretty genius. So, let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break down that recipe. First, we'll look at the core ingredients of comfortable air. Then, we'll see what happens when you only change the temperature. After that, we get to the real magic, how an AC literally wrings moisture out of the air. We'll even look at how you can put moisture back in, and finally, we'll see how it's all blended together for that perfect final mix. All right, let's jump right into part one, the air recipe. Because as you're about to see, creating comfort is about so much more than just cranking down the thermostat. I mean, really think about that for a second. You've been there, right? You walk into a room that's technically cool, but it feels sticky and damp. Or maybe a room that's warm, but the air feels really crisp and dry. That feeling tells you everything. True comfort isn't just one thing. It all comes down to a perfect balance between two key ingredients. First, you've got temperature. That's the obvious one, how hot or cold the air feels. But the second one is just as important, humidity. That's all the invisible water vapor just hanging out in the air. Your AC is basically a master juggler managing both of these things at all times. So, how do we engineers keep track of these ingredients? We use this. Now I know it looks incredibly complicated, but stick with me. This is called a psychrometric chart, and for our purposes, let's just call it our chef's map. It's a cheat sheet that lets us see the exact condition of the air, its temperature, and its moisture level, all in one spot. Every single thing an AC does can be tracked as a journey on this map. Okay, let's move on to our second section and start with the absolute simplest thing you can do in our air recipe, just changing the temperature.
First up, we have something called sensible heating. It's a fancy-sounding name for a really simple idea, making the air warmer without adding or taking away any water. Seriously, just picture a basic electric space heater. That's all this is.
So, back to our map. This process is super easy to see. When we add sensible heat, we start at one point, and we just move in a straight line to the right. The temperature goes up, but notice how the line stays perfectly flat? That means the amount of moisture isn't changing at all. Simple. But here's where it gets interesting. Even though the actual amount of water in the air stays the same, the relative humidity goes down. Why? Well, because warmer air can hold way more moisture, so the same amount of water feels like less because the air is thirstier. This is exactly why your house feels so dry in the winter when the heat is on. And you guessed it, the exact opposite is also true. Sensible cooling is what happens when we lower the air's temperature, but again, without touching the amount of water in it. This is definitely part of what your AC does, but it is not the whole story. And on our map, it's exactly what you'd expect. We start somewhere, and we just move in a straight line to the left. The temperature drops, but that moisture level totally constant. A perfect horizontal journey. Now here's the twist. As the air gets colder, it can't hold as much water. So even though the amount of moisture hasn't changed, the relative humidity actually goes up. The air is getting closer and closer to being full or saturated. This is why a cool basement can feel so damp and clammy. So clearly, just making the air colder isn't going to cut it. And that brings us to section 3. This is the game changer. This is where the real magic of air conditioning happens, literally wringing the water out of the air. This is the 1-2 punch that really defines a modern AC unit. It's called cooling and dehumidification. The system is doing two things at once. It's dropping the temperature and it's actively pulling water vapor out of the air. This is what gives you that amazing, crisp, comfortable feeling on a disgustingly hot and sticky day. And on our chef's map, this creates a totally new path. It's a diagonal move. We're moving left because the air is cooling down, but we're also moving down, which means moisture is being removed. It's a 2-for-1 move that turns awful, muggy air into something wonderful.
You can actually think of your AC's total power as being split between two different jobs. Part of its energy is spent on sensible cooling. That's just lowering the temperature. But the other part is spent on what's called latent cooling. And that's the energy needed to rip that water vapor out of the air and turn it back into a liquid.
So where does all that water go? Well, you've definitely seen it. You know that constant drip, drip, drip of water coming from an AC unit on a hot summer day? That is literally all the humidity the system has sucked out of your indoor air. That's your room's sweat condensed back into water. Okay, but what if you have the opposite problem? What if the air is just way too dry?
Let's jump to section 4 and see how these systems can actually add moisture back when it's needed.
Now, the technical term is adiabatic humidification, but you probably know it by a much more common name, evaporative cooling. Just think of those big swamp coolers, or even just that cooling feeling when you get out of a swimming pool. As water evaporates, it has to pull heat energy from the air around it, which naturally makes the air feel cooler.
And this creates a really unique path on our map. We're moving up because we're adding moisture to the air, but we're also moving to the left because that evaporation is actually dropping the air's temperature. It's a super clever way to humidify and cool down at the same time, and it's perfect for really hot, dry climates.
All right, time for the grand finale. In our last section, let's put all these pieces together. Because in the real world, an HVAC system isn't just doing one of these things. It's constantly mixing and blending different kinds of air to create that perfect final product.
And the recipe is actually pretty simple. Step 1, the system creates that super cold, super dry air we talked about. But it doesn't just blast you with that. Step 2, it cleverly blends that with some of the warmer, more humid air that it's pulling back out of your room. And the result, step 3, is that perfectly balanced, comfortable air that comes out of your vents.
So you see, it really all does come back to that idea. Comfort isn't just about brute force cooling. It's about finesse. It's a precise recipe. And your air conditioner, well, it's the chef, constantly tasting and adjusting the ingredients to get it just right.
And all of this leaves us with one final thought. Now that you know the ingredients and you understand the recipe for how temperature and humidity are blended together, what's the perfect air mix for you?